Hello and welcome to Lois and Morgana Davidson Art. It's Lois here and welcome to my studio for another sky practice. I'm a full-time artist specialising in watercolour painting in the loose style, and because I demonstrate that style here on YouTube so often, it's really important that I keep in practice. And I like to paint very loosely. I like to paint my skies in one go, often with just one colour, and it does take a bit of practice, but it's certainly well worth trying out. So if you'd like to paint along with me in my studio today, then please feel free. Today I'm painting this beautiful Scottish scene. It's Loch Lomond, and I've been inspired by this amazing photograph that I found on Pixabay. I'm using my artistic licence to simplify the scene, and as always being inspired by the photograph rather than trying to produce a slavish copy. So the first thing I'll do is draw out my rough outline, my simplified scene, onto a piece of watercolour paper. Today I'm using Saunders Waterford cold press watercolour paper. It's taped to my board, and my board's at an angle of about 20 degrees, so gravity will help with the painting. Here are my colours today. I'm not sure whether I'll use them all, but these are the ones that I've got out. From left to right, that's Payne's Grey, Sepia, Alizarin Crimson, Lemon Yellow Hue, Raw Sienna, Burnt Sienna, French Ultramarine, Ultramarine Blue and Cobalt Turquoise Light. I'm going to use the wet in wet technique to paint the sky, and today's sky I'm looking for a really light, fresh, summery sky with the sky reflected in the loch or lake below. I'm using a large synthetic wash brush. This is an Escoda size 20, and I'm wetting the sky, most of it, but leaving a few dry patches. I've mixed up cobalt blue with a little bit of cobalt turquoise here to get this lovely fresh blue. And now you can see I'm working it in and around where I've wet the sky, and I'll end up with sort of slightly harder edges where the paint kind of comes up against dry patches of paper, and softer edges where the paint goes into the wet paper. Trying to leave quite a few cloud shapes here. Just slowly working around the sky, dipping into more of my paint, which is quite a light value. Dipping into a little bit of water just to lighten it up even more. And this will give me just the faint impression in places of cloud shadows too. I'm bringing the sky colour over my distant mountains, and this will start to get a bit of tone there. I can then work over that to create the aerial perspective and depth and distance that I need for this mountain scene. Now to reflect the sky in the loch or lake, and so I'm going to swap from these fairly random brush strokes that I've used to create the clouds in the sky to horizontal brush strokes, and I'm going to make sure that I keep the reflected water darker below that darkest patch in the middle, which is just to the side of the little cottage or croft, and of course that will help to make it stand out as the cottages are my point of interest or focal point. I'm now going to continue and paint in the first layer. That's most of the foreground and midground this side of the lake, using various mixes of raw sienna, burnt sienna, lemon yellow, cobalt blue, maybe a little bit of Payne's Grey, and a bit of cobalt turquoise light. For this, you can see I've swapped to a different wash brush. This is a 1.5 inch Mottler brush. So it's a large synthetic flat brush. It's a synthetic sable, and it holds a lot of paint and water. And it's got a very sort of thin edge like a flat brush. And I can get quite a lot of different brush strokes from it. And as I dip into different mixes of the colours that I mentioned just now, I can make sure that I've got lots of variety, but harmonious variety of colour and texture across the foreground and begin to build it up around the crofts, leaving them unpainted for now. And then I can work on the crofts using the wet on dry method once I've finished this wet on wet background layer first. While the rich paint here around the croft is still damp, I'm taking this opportunity to scrape through the paint, through the darker paint, to reveal some lighter fence posts just around the cottage. I'll knock those back a little bit if they look too harsh later, but this just gives me a nice contrast and helps to draw the eye towards the cottages. I use a palette knife for this, but you can use the corner of a plastic store card or the pointed end of a paintbrush or even your fingernail. So that's the first wet in wet layer finished. I need to leave it to dry completely now. It's all a little bit brighter than it looks now because I haven't got the lighting quite right in my studio, but we'll come back as soon as it's dry and then begin to paint the mountains. So now on to the mountains. I'm using my Escoda Perla size 14 round brush, and I've mixed up a mid-value mix of alizarin crimson with some raw sienna, burnt sienna and a few touches of Payne's grey and a little bit of the cobalt blue in places, and I'm using this to create these sort of heathery looking colours for the closer of the distant mountains. I shall add a bit of Payne's grey to some of them to darken them, and then kind of get some variety just by changing up the hues and the tones a little bit in various parts of these mountains, and then using a very light value, almost paint water, just to paint in the far distant mountains, and hopefully that will give me some good aerial perspective and depth and distance. So that's the mountains just about done, and I hope you can see that simply by adjusting the hue and the values of the mountains, we've built up this layered effect. And now finally, with this very pale mix, which is almost paint water, we can just put in the hint of the furthest mountains becoming sort of lost in the mist. And now, while I'm waiting for the mountains to dry, I'm going to focus now on the area around the cottages. I'm going to start off with a nice orange roof for this little tiny croft or shed on the right, using burnt sienna and a small flat brush. I think this is a 1/2 inch or 1/3 of an inch flat brush. And then I've mixed up Payne's grey, nice rich mixture, and I'll paint in the grey slate roof of the croft. And I'll build up some darker values in the trees and bushes around the croft, and then in the foreground to bring the scene together. Note that I'll be painting around the fence posts that I painted in earlier, but I can knock those back a little bit as I go, adding a shadow side to the right of each post as I need to, and just put just enough detail, but more importantly just enough tone and value around the cottages to make them stand out. Using Payne's grey and my small calligraphy brush, I can then put in the windows and the door of the croft on the shadow side. Once those are dry, I can just put a bit of shadow over those walls, and that will make the gable end facing left stand out even more. I think I'm almost done now, just building up a bit of something and nothing, a tumble of sort of bracken and grasses and weeds across the foreground. Of course, the foreground isn't the focus in this painting. The focus is going to be the cottages, but then the cottages will lead us to the sky, and of course the sky reflected in the lake and the mountains. I'm going to remove the tape now. This gives me my nice clean white border. I always enjoy this part, seeing the painting emerge, and then once that border is revealed and I can look at the painting with fresh eyes, I can decide if it just needs a few finishing touches. And often at this stage with a loose painting, it's worth stepping well back and just seeing what the overall impression is, and that's where you can see what needs to be done. And of course what I haven't done yet is put the shadows on the walls of the crofts or cottages. So with a very light value watery mix of cobalt blue, using my flat brush, I'm just going to simply paint over the walls. Make sure your door and windows are completely dry when you do this, because you don't want the paint to run. I can also put a bit of that colour over any of the fence posts that are standing out a little bit too much. It'll just knock them back slightly. And I think I just want a little bit of definition between the mountains and the water. So I'm going to just use a very light touch of Payne's Grey across the bottom, and that will just give me that slight amount of shadow and definition, but without being too strong. And if it looks too strong in places, I can smudge it in sort of horizontally using a clean finger. Just blend that in nicely. So that's it. Here's the finished painting. It's looking a bit washed out in my studio, so I'll get a better photograph to show you how the colours look in real life. And I'm wondering now, did I achieve what I set out to, which was to get a light and airy sky and get that beautiful sky reflected in the calm stillness of the lake? So I'll just zoom you in a little bit closer, and then we can have a look. And I hope you can see that the brushwork is really simple, just relying on the wet in wet technique, which is so unique to watercolour painting and yet so effective. But it does take a bit of practice. And I think the important thing here is to make sure that you paint the lake or loch with horizontal brush strokes, and then use that sort of more wild and free brushwork to paint in the sky wet in wet. And by practicing these techniques on a daily basis, I'm hoping to really build up my skills, but not in terms of complexity. It's simplicity that I'm looking for with my loose watercolour painting. If you're interested in watching an advert-free version of this and also having access to the initial pencil sketch to download and refer to, then please follow the link below to Patreon, where there's an advert-free version. And you'll also be supporting the channel there. And thank you so much to everyone that does support our channel, either through my Patreon page or Morgana's. We really do appreciate each and every one of you. Well, thank you so much. Please leave us a like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We've almost hit that elusive goal of 100,000 subscribers, which is, quite frankly, unbelievable. I still can't believe it when I started off this funny little channel, that it would grow so large. So thanks to each and every one of you for watching and subscribing. And I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.